we already discussed the basic concepts of cost accounting and costing. So today we will discuss about the classification of costs and the concept of cost sheet, which is used for calculating the cost per unit. Now you see, this classification of cost can be done in different manner, right? There are several ways, several outlooks for through which we can do the classification of cost. The first one is by time, right? First one is by time, that is, uh, it can be historical or it can be predetermined, right? Historical means the cost has already been incurred, right? And we can use this cost for uh, for uh, uh, for for recording purposes, for determining the for forecasting the future cost, etc., etc. The second way of classification is by nature of elements, like for example the material cost, labor costs, and the overhead costs, right? It can also be classified on the basis of the traceability to the product, like it can be direct cost or indirect cost. Direct cost means that is the cost which we can directly assign to the final product, and indirect cost is the cost which we can't directly assign to the final product, but we need to allocate it on some suitable basis. Like for example, the material used for production of a car, that is a direct cost, but the salary paid to the accountant, it may be an indirect cost. Then association with the product, right, that is the product and period. By changes in the activity of volume, we will use this concept later on when you will do marginal costing and cost volume profit analysis, etc. So, on the basis of changes in activity or volume, if the cost changes, then we can classify, right, in three categories. First is the fixed cost. Fixed cost is the cost which doesn't change with the change in the level of activity, right? Like for example, rent paid to the office building, whether the company produces 100 units or 1000 units, the rent will be same. So it is a fixed cost. Variable cost is the cost which varies with a change in production level or change within a given range of time. Like for example, the direct material cost. Say if I produce more, then my direct material cost will increase, and if I produce less, it should decrease. So this type of cost is called the variable cost. There are certain types of cost which is partly fixed and partly variable. So these type of costs are called semi-variable. For example, the workers in a factory, the workers in a factory, they may be the remuneration structure may be like a fixed amount per month, and then additional amount on the basis of their performance, right? So the performance bonus may be variable, but this fixed sum which is paid to the workers every month, that may be fixed. So it is not completely variable, but kind of semi variable type of cost. Then it can be by function also. So function means it can be related to manufacturing, maybe related to administration, then maybe selling, uh, selling, research and development, or pre-production. So depending on their function, also we can classify the costs. Then another way of classifying the cost is in relationship with the accounting period. Like it can be of capital nature, it can be of revenue nature. If the cost which I incurred, it is linked to multiple accounting periods. For example, a machine has been purchased, which is supposed to exist in a workable condition for next 5 years. So I can say that that is a capital cost, but I'm paying a monthly salary to the worker, right? It may be of revenue nature because it is linked to only to that month, right? Not to multiple or particular year, not to the range of years. Controllability, on the basis of controllability also we can segregate the costs like controllable and non-controllable. Controllable cost is that a cost which which is dependent upon your decision, right? So if you can decide that whether I will incur this cost or not incur this cost, but there may be certain cost which is not under your control, right? So those type of costs are called non-controllable costs. So these are the basic types of classification of costs, right? So understanding of this, we will discuss this cost in detail now. Understanding of these costs are necessary because many of our decisions are linked to the cost behavior with time, cost behavior with productions. So historical cost first, these costs are ascertained after they are incurred. Such costs are available only when the production of particular thing has already been done, right? So these are historical costs, these are ascertained, already been incurred, right? Predetermined cost, these costs are calculated before they are incurred on the basis of specification of all factors affecting cost. That is, it is kind of a this futuristic in nature, right? So this is the classification by time. By nature of element, the material. So material cost is what? The substance from which the product is made is known as material. It can be direct as well as indirect. As I said, that the metal sheets used for manufacturing of cars can be an example for material. Labor, now with material, to convert the raw material into the finished products, you need to add some human element, some human effort. The people who are helping to produce a product is known as labor. So material and labor, usually particularly in manufacturing sector, these are the two major components of cost. Then degree of traceability to the products, direct cost and indirect costs. Direct costs are what? That those which can be easily traceable to the product or costing unit or cost center or some specific activity, that is cost of wood for making furniture. Now you see, direct cost is which can be directly traceable, okay? So like as I said, that the metal sheets which is used in manufacturing of car, that we can directly trace, right? So these are called direct costs. Indirect costs, the indirect costs are difficult to trace to a single product or it is uneconomic to do so. So these are indirect costs, like for example, a salary paid to the accountant, right? It is an indirect cost, okay? So you cannot directly assign it to the final product. Association with the product, so it can be classified into two. The product cost. Product costs are those which are traceable to the product and included in inventory values. Period cost. Period costs are incurred on the basis of time, such as rent, salaries, etc. Include many selling and administrative costs essential to keep the business running. So period cost is the cost which is linked to a time period. Like if the monthly salary is being paid, the monthly salary is linked to a time period. So it is, so rent for administrative building, if it needs to be paid, is linked to a time period. So these are the period costs, right? And product costs are those which are traceable to the product and included in the inventory values. Fixed cost, and by changes in activity of volume, we already said that there are two types of cost. One is fixed cost, another one is the variable cost. So according to CIMA, London Chartered Institute of Management Accounting, the cost which incurred for a period and which within a certain output and turnover limits tends to be unaffected by fluctuations in the level of activity. So like insurance of the building or the factory or rent, it is the fixed cost. And variable cost is like which varies, the cost which varies with the level, change in production level within a given time range. So variable costs are those costs that vary directly and proportionately with the output. Like for example, direct material. If I produce 10, if the company produces 10 vehicles, it will have some direct material cost. But if it increases the production level to 50 units, then direct material will increase proportionately, right? So this is an example of the variable cost. Semi-fixed, as I said, that is partly fixed, partly variable, right? So that means this type of costs, they do not change proportionately. They change with level of production, but the change is not proportionate. So a part of it is actually fixed. For example, depreciation and repairs. Functional cost, so manufacturing and production cost. What are the functional costs? On the basis of function, right? On the basis of function, if we try to segregate, right, the costs, so we can first classification I can do on the basis of the manufacturing cost. So it is the cost of operating the manufacturing division of an undertaking. So for a company which has a manufacturing division, so example of manufacturing companies, maybe say automobile companies, say cement companies, right, textile, etc. So in these companies which manufacture, where the manufacturing process goes on, right, there the cost incurred for running the manufacturing division, it is called the manufacturing or production cost. So it includes what? A major component is direct material, the material used for production. Like for example, in iron and steel company, it is a manufacturing company. It uses iron ore, it uses coking coal for manufacturing the finished steel, right, from the iron ore. So it is a manufacturing cost, and it is a direct material, right, because you can assign the cost of raw material directly with the finished products. Direct labor, the laborers who are directly associated working in the factory to manufacture. Like for example, in an automobile factory, the workers working in the assembly line, or the painters painting the body of the car, right, or the workers working on cutting the gears, right, in gear cutting machines. So they are the people who are directly involved into the production, right. So this is called the direct labor. Okay. Then there are direct expenses. What can be the example of direct expense? It can be, for example, electricity used for running the gear cutting machines, right. In automobile factory, they use gear cutting machines for computerized controlled machines for cutting the gears. So these machines are run by electricity. So this electricity used for that, we can say that it is an example of direct expense. Then packing costs, right? These are all examples of the manufacturing or production costs, right? Even all the indirect costs, like for example, the office clerk working in a manufacturing division, right? The office clerk, salary of office clerk working, who maintains the records in the paint shop, right? The painting division in automobile factory. So these are the examples of overhead expenses and part of manufacturing and production costs. Then next function is the administration, right? So they are indirect administration costs. They are indirect and cover all expenditure incurred in formulating the policy, directing the organization and controlling the operation of a concerned, right? So administration cost is, the example is, every company usually they have a finance and accounts division. So there are people working there, and these people are paid salaries, right, and other costs are there. Now the expenses made for paying salaries to the employees in finance and accounts division, this is an example of administration cost, right? Or salary paid to the CEO, for example, it is part of the administration cost, right? And we need to see that this should not be linked to the research, development, production, distribution or selling functions, because these functions are segregated separately. Okay, when you prepare the cost sheet, these functions are segregated separately. So other than that, whatever administrative expense is there, that is part of the administration cost. So once the finished product, once the final product has been produced, it has to reach from the factory complex to the end user, right? So from the factory complex to the end user, this path is covered by the selling and distribution channels, right? So there is a link, the link between the end consumer and the manufacturing, the production hub, the factory. So there is a link. Who is the link? The selling and distribution division, right? And for selling and distribution, they incur a cost, right? This is quite an important and significant department, and how much they will cost, it depends upon the nature of the product and which channel they are using for reaching the end consumer, because ultimately when something is being produced, it needs to be sold, right? So selling and distribution is selling cost is the cost of seeking to create and stimulate demand. That is, like for example, advertisements, market research, etc., etc. Because lot of effort is given by companies to design a foolproof selling strategy, right? And for creating a brand, for creating a consumer awareness, right? So for doing these things, the company uses a lot of time and resource for it, and this cost comes under the selling and distribution cost. So first is selling, right? Then comes the distribution. What is distribution? Distribution cost is the expenditure which begins with making the package produced available for the dispatch and ends with making the reconditioned package available for reuse. So selling is about creating the awareness, right? Finding out who is the potential customer and let the customer know that there is a product. Now, if the customer is willing to buy the product, then there must be a channel through which it will leave the factory shed, company complex, and reach the home in the hands of the final consumer. This channel is called the distribution channel, and the cost incurred for maintaining this distribution channel is called the distribution cost. And when you combine these two, right, selling and distribution goes hand in hand. When you combine these two, it is called selling and distribution cost. So what are the examples? For example, warehousing cost, right? So warehousing cost, the cartage, that it includes expenditure incurred in transporting articles to central or local storage. Okay, so these are called selling and distribution cost. Research and development cost. What are the research and development cost? To remain competitive, the companies need to continuously evolve, right? Because if the competitors evolve and our company, stops evolving, right, stop innovation, then after some time what will happen? The customers may lose interest, and gradually the market share may start falling, and the company can start losing money, etc., etc. Now, this research and development cost, they include the cost of discovering new ideas. So, this is very important, new ideas, because new ideas gives the company an edge over its competitors. Process, products by experiment, and implementing such results on a commercial basis, right? Such results on a commercial basis. So, they need to continuously evolve over the new ideas. Another way of classifying is controllable cost and uncontrollable cost. So, what is the definition of uncontrollable cost? So, according to SEMA, it defines controllable cost as the cost which can be influenced by its budget holder. So, any cost which is discretionary, right, that we can say it is the controllable cost. Like for example, advertising, right. So, if the company faces some fund crunch, right, from some economic tightness, then what it can do, it can, for the time being, they can reduce the advertising cost. Okay. So, these are during the turbulent times, these are the costs which are first the management tries to control. Like for example, travel, right? At the time of tightening, the travel cost of the executives, right, that may get controlled, right, by the higher authority. So, these are the cost control measures. Donations, for example, the company may stop donations for the time being, right, if they are facing some fund crunch. Then there are uncontrollable costs. It is the cost which is not subject to control at any level of managerial supervision, right. So, there are certain types of costs which the management may not be able to control. The example is that if the company has taken an administrative building on rent, right. So, usually these are long term lease rents, like the lease may be of 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, like that. So, even if within this period there may be, company may go through several cycles, right, sometimes boom cycle, sometimes recession and all, sometimes high income, sometimes low income, that is possible. But the company cannot stop paying the rent, right. So, this is a kind of uncontrollable cost. This cost I have to pay whether I am earning or not earning. If I remain in position, so this I need to pay. So, these are called the uncontrollable costs. Fine. So, these are the basic ways of classifying the cost, and behavior of cost is very, very important while taking managerial decisions, right. So, when in next upcoming videos we will discuss about the management accounting tools, then the reference to these various costs, it will repeatedly appear, it will repeatedly come, right.